took a cargo ship from San Francisco to Hong Kong, and this is the summer of 1974. So it was an 18-day crossing across the Pacific. But I remember coming into Hong Kong Harbor and seeing these high-rise buildings, not really glamorous ones, but more like weathered, rained on, sun-baked kind of high-rise buildings. And this was before Hong Kong had a reputation of being any sort of a modern city. But I walked around for a few weeks on that trip before traveling on further to Southeast Asia. And I guess you could say I kind of fell in love with the city at first, at the get-go, and liked it a lot and kept going back, and eventually lived there for a stretch. My name is Greg Girard. I'm a Canadian photographer. I live in Vancouver. I lived in Tokyo, Shanghai, and Hong Kong for many years, and still work photographing that part of the world quite a bit. I got my first serious camera, let's call it, when I was 16 years old. And so really from the age of 16, 17, I was photographing in Vancouver, the city I grew up in, and was making pictures downtown in the kind of the more working class, scruffy part of the city near the port. Vancouver is a port city, and so in those days it was really connected to the waterfront, in a way that's not true anymore and isn't really true in a lot of places. That connection to the waterfront, the working waterfront, is kind of gone in a lot of places, because of 9/11 and containerization. But Vancouver still had that kind of gritty working waterfront in those days, and that part of the town appealed to me. So I was photographing downtown from a pretty early age, in high school, staying in cheap hotels on weekends and photographing people and everything going on. I grew up in pretty boring suburbs, and just going downtown was a real adventure and a real change of everything. It's a different world, and that appealed to me. I've never really had a problem with finding things to photograph, wherever I am, whether it's at home or in a new place, in a strange place. Things jump out at you, so there's that. And then there's the stuff going on in your own head that you maybe connect to wherever you are, walking around in a new place or walking around in a place you know really well. In a place like Tokyo in the 1970s, it wasn't known in the way it is now. And so to discover what it was actually like was a huge surprise, a really interesting and moving one, to find this kind of hyper-modern city that nobody had told you about. That was great. And I walked around the first night. By morning, pretty much knew I wanted to stay there for some period of time. Places that are well photographed or over photographed, I mean, you can still photograph them. I can still photograph them, but you have to take all of that into account at the same time. And so how you do it is maybe a little bit different than someplace you've never seen a picture of or you've never been to before. If you're visiting somewhere that's got a history of being photographed, that has a history of looking at photography, then these things kind of factor into how you make pictures. And so, how I do it is going to be different than how anybody else does it. How you do it's going to be different from how I do it. But, I think you kind of try to factor in this stuff that's known, whether it's politics or history or whatever some disconnect might be, or some issue. I mean, these things get factored in, and you decide to pay attention to them or ignore them, or some mix of those two things. In a place for me like Tokyo, which I've been photographing since the 1970s, I mean, I still like wandering around there a lot, and it's still, in a way, kind of a new place to me, and probably always will be, because I didn't grow up there. I may spend a lot of time there when I was young, but it's certainly a place that's in in the public eye in a way it wasn't in the 1970s. I mean, Tokyo seems to be kind of like the new Paris. It's just foreign enough for North Americans to be interesting, distant, but not completely alienating. So, I mean, I think it really is a super visited place now in a way that it wasn't, a few decades ago. So living in Hong Kong back in the 80s, people mentioned this place called the Kowloon Walled City. It was a place you're not supposed to go, basically. It was like a neighborhood parents would tell their children to stay clear of. So I was aware that this place existed, but I'd never seen it and never had met anybody who'd been there. It was near the old international airport, Kai Tak Airport. And one day I was photographing near the airport, and at night I came around a corner, and at the end of the block there was this massive building thing. It looked almost sort of medieval, but modern at the same time in the sense of lighting and TV antenna on the roof, like a forest of them. And I thought, this has to be the Kowloon Walled City that everybody's kind of told me about. So what it is, or what it was 300, more than 300 interconnected, basically homemade high-rise buildings. So these high-rise buildings made without input from architects or engineers. It had a reputation for lawlessness, but by the time I got there, it was mostly just a very kind of working class vertical village in this extraordinary physical circumstances, buildings built next to each other and on top of each other. So you have this agglomeration of 300 interconnected high-rise buildings. And at the time, although I didn't know it, there were about 35,000 people living in this concentration of buildings. It was at the time the most densely populated place on the planet. And that was one of the statistics that came out, I think, towards the end before it was demolished. And so I started photographing there little by little in between my trips out of town and on assignment for magazines and whatnot in the region. And, I knew I wanted to do something about the Kowloon Walled City because the only things I'd ever seen were kind of, gritty documentary style pictures of how terrible the place was. But if you start spending any time there, what you notice immediately is that it's a working class community where, folks are trying to get by like anywhere, except in this crazy place with, water pipes and electrical wires over the alleyways. They called it City of Darkness because there's no space between the buildings. And at street level, streets were actually just alleys. There's no sunlight, so it's artificial light. Maybe late in the day, you might get a ray of sunlight through one of the alleys to illuminate something. But I wanted to make pictures to show what it was really like because it had this, terrible reputation about, and part of its history, it certainly did have drugs and prostitution and gambling and those sorts of things, which had all mostly vanished by the time I was there. But what you still had were this incredible collection of factories, making all sorts of things, people working, people trying to get by. And so, I wanted to make a kind of a set of pictures that describe what the place was actually like. It's almost outrageous to say it, but 30 or 40 years ago, I kind of felt like I had night all to myself in a way, and so it was really an adventure to be making photographs at night of ordinary places, ordinary things. Up until that point, it seemed, night was used to make things either look kind of glamorous or a little bit dangerous. There was a kind of a night trope that was very limited. And I kind of felt night hadn't been explored at all. And so I got interested in just wandering around at night in kind of ordinary places where there's not necessarily even a light source in the picture, but it's picking up ambient light from somewhere. And that was a big adventure for me, that kind of wandering around at night, at first in Vancouver and then later in Tokyo and Hong Kong and Shanghai and other cities. Things just look different, and I liked the surprise and the mystery of what happens on film. You're not seeing the picture immediately. You get your film back, and the transparency film looks surprising, and you get to know over time what it's going to do. So that surprise kind of maybe gets, distilled a little bit or diluted a little bit. And I kind of made, a book about Shanghai that used that approach a lot, and it seemed a fitting approach for Shanghai at the time because a lot of the city hadn't changed because China was cut off from the capitalist grid for a number of decades. And so you had this kind of sensation that you might have also gotten in Havana or East Berlin or other places that didn't really, develop in that building for profit kind of way that happens in the West. And then all that got overturned and Shanghai started making up for lost time. And so you had these probably two different cities occupying the same space. And night seemed like a really good way to show that, because a lot of the homes and buildings that looked derelict during the day, they were actually occupied. And at night you'd see the light in the windows to show that these piles of bricks practically were actually still buildings that people lived in. So it had kind of a practical approach as well as a poetic one, let's say. And I was working a lot for magazines at the time, so it was a bit of a detour or a departure from the kind of work I was doing at the time. And in a way it was returning to just the earliest days of picture making where you wander and find things. I never made pictures thinking that one day they'll be valuable or something like that. I mean, I made pictures about now for now. And I still do that, I think. But inevitably, over time, over the decades, they turn into something else. Every photograph does. It's a picture of a person, except, look at the hairstyle, or look at the clothes. That's from the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, whatever. So every picture kind of has that attached to it. And I guess it does change it because it gives it a kind of a retro appeal in many cases that it didn't, when the picture was first taken. So it's going to get that whether you intend it to or not. And it's, it's kind of a blessing and a curse, I guess, I mean, it makes the picture interesting in a way it wasn't at the time. So, I mean, even a 1980s high school yearbook is interesting now in a way it wasn't in the 1980s. It was just a yearbook. I mean, in my case, I didn't do anything with these pictures for decades. I'm looking into this filing cabinet full of pictures from the 70s and 80s thinking, well, maybe I should do something with these. And again, it's just one of these things that happen, life because of the internet. This is even before social media, but I think I made my first website and posted some of these pictures on my website. Misha saw them and invited me to do a book. And so that was the first appearance these pictures made in book form in around 2010. It went out of print, or it was a small book, very small print run, and it kind of disappears. And then the internet's here to stay, social media arrives, and it seems things spread around in ways they never did. And I saw that, I guess I was posting on Instagram or something, some of this early work, and people liked it and probably said, oh, you should do a book. I mean, it was probably something that simple, and that got me thinking, yeah, maybe I should. And so I did. I've got kind of mixed feelings about it. I mean, it's like, I kind of wish people saw the pictures when I first took them. It's great that they see them now. I'm happy I've still got them. I mean, I'm happy I didn't lose them over the decades moving around between different cities. It's kind of a miracle they survived. But yeah, I guess kind of kind of mixed feelings. I mean, I'm certainly excited if I come across a box of slides from the 70s that I hadn't looked at in 30 years or something. That's still fun to see that. So I guess I'm subject to that kind of thing as well. Some years ago, I was working in Japan, going to different towns on a project about U.S. military bases in the region. Every town I went to, I noticed seemed to have a place called Snack Sakura. Sakura is cherry blossom. A snack in Japan is a kind of a bar, usually small place with a counter, a few stools, maybe a booth. Some places are a bit upscale with, quite nice decor. Other places are just super simple, just, a counter, some stools. Anyway, so I started noticing that every place seemed to have a bar called Snack Sakura. So I checked with the Japan Snack Owners Association, and it was true. Not every town had them, but Snack Sakura was the most popular name of their members for a bar or a snack. So I thought, well, maybe this could be something, every town having a Snack Sakura. So I started looking around, going from town to town, and photographing, the inside, the outside, the people that drink there, work there. It's a great way of going somewhere where you've got no reason to go and no business to go, but just this kind of abstract idea of looking for Snack Sakuras all over the country. So I've been working on this project for about 6 years now. Had to take a break during COVID, of course, when Japan was closed and everywhere was closed. But I've been going from prefecture to prefecture, town to town, photographing these Snack Sakuras across the country. So I'm traveling from Okinawa through the main islands to Hokkaido, looking for Snack Sakuras. And so that's the latest project I'm working on.
If you'd like to support Greg's work, I will link his books down below, or alternatively, you can come to The Untitled Love here in Echo Park in Los Angeles to view his books, as well as an incredible selection of other artists' work. And before I wrap up this video, I'd like to thank our sponsor for making this all possible, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is an incredible all-in-one website building platform that you can use to build your photography portfolio online. Their customizable templates and online customer support make it incredibly easy to get a website up and running with your photography. They also have an incredibly intuitive e-commerce platform that I've used personally to sell my books and prints online. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can hit the link in my description for a 14-day free trial of Squarespace. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Willem for 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain.